So in this video, we're going to go through some issues related to the treatment of animals. And we're going to go through some arguments for and against mistreating animals. So the first argument is the animals kill other animals argument. So it goes, if animals kill other animals, then it is morally okay for humans to kill animals. Animals do kill other animals, therefore it is morally okay for humans to kill animals. So this basically is trying to justify the way that we treat animals as things that we can kill without much moral obligation not to, right? So how might we counter an argument like this? So the first way to counter might be to say that animals kill other animals. Yes, that's a fact. But it is not morally okay for humans to kill animals. So in this rejection, we're trying to make a distinction between what's permissible for animals to do and what's permissible for humans to do. And we're saying that humans have more responsibilities than animals do. So sure, animals kill other animals, that's okay. The animals aren't responsible morally. But humans are. Humans indeed are morally responsible. And we can justify this kind of distinction by saying, well, look, animals don't have the reasoning capabilities that humans do. At least most animals, we think, right, don't have much reasoning capabilities. Maybe some of the higher order animals like monkeys, chimpanzees, gorillas, they might have advanced reasoning capabilities. Maybe dolphins too. But most animals don't. The humans, though, humans do, at least most humans. And the humans who don't have good reasoning capabilities, usually we don't actually hold responsible in the same way that we hold humans with good reasoning capabilities. We might say, that human wasn't of right mind, right? That human, they pled insanity or something like that. So there may be a reason to make some kind of distinction like this, and so we would be rejecting the first premise there. The second thing we could do is say that animals do not kill other animals. Now, saying this just seems untrue. Certain animals are predators, right? And they do, in fact, kill other animals as their lifestyle, as sort of one of the necessities of their lives. Some animals are herbivores, but even herbivores still can kill. So a cow might not eat other animals, but it might trample them. That's possible. And even it might kill other animals in the sense that it might eat other animals if it's eating grass and just a bug slips in by mistake and it eats that bug. That's still killing another animal. So we probably can't reject premise 2, so we're just left rejecting premise 1. But either way, we end up rejecting this argument. The second argument is the power argument. So it goes, if we are powerful enough to control an animal's behavior and the conditions under which it lives, then we are morally allowed to exercise that control. We are powerful enough to control an animal's behavior and the conditions under which it lives. Therefore, we are morally allowed to control an animal's behavior and the conditions under which it lives. So this is also an argument that says that we can essentially treat animals how we like. But what are some counters to this? So the first counter is to say that we are powerful enough. Sure, we're powerful enough to control an animal's behavior and the conditions under which it lives. We accept that. But we are not morally allowed to exercise that control. So in this case, we're saying, sure, we're powerful enough. But that doesn't mean we're morally allowed to. So giving examples of this, you might say something like, I'm powerful enough to kill you with my bare hands, let's say. Let's say you work out a lot and you just have a grip that could strangle somebody. You could do it. You're powerful enough to do it. But are you morally allowed to do it? Does that make sense to say that you can just, you should do whatever you're powerful enough to do? It's basically a might makes right argument, saying that the mighty, that all that morality is whatever the mighty say it is. That's something that most of us reject. We mostly say, most of us think that there's a difference between what we're powerful enough to do and the things that we should do. The second thing we could do is we could say that we are not powerful enough to control an animal's behavior and the conditions under which it lives. So this one might be true in certain cases, because we might say something like, we might say something like that bear is overpowering us. If a bear is overpowering us, we aren't powerful enough to control it, right? We might be helpless before the bear, and it might even kill us and eat us, right? So we're not powerful enough to do that in every case for every animal. And that seems true, but it probably misses the point a little bit to say that, because I think in most cases, most of the time, humans do have control over animals. It's the norm, at least in contemporary world. The norm is that humans have guns, humans have houses, humans have nets and traps and all sorts of things, and they can outsmart and overpower animals all the time. And it's only exceptional cases where the opposite is true. So we would still have to admit that in all those other cases, all of those majority cases, we still are actually overpowering animals. The next argument is the dependency argument. And it goes, if animals depend for their existence on their subsistence on humans, or their subsistence on humans, then humans have a right to treat those animals in any way that best suits human interests. Farm and lab animals depend for their existence or their sustenance on humans. Therefore, humans have a right to treat farm and lab animals in any way that best suits human interests. So again, this is an argument for doing what you want to animals. So what are some counters? So first, yes, we might say, animals depend for their existence or their sustenance on humans. That's true, right? That's true for pets, etc. That's true for zoo animals. It's even true in many cases for animals that live in protected zones. But humans do not have a right to treat those animals in any way that best suits their interests. So just because they depend on us doesn't mean we can treat them badly. And if you think about this, this is true of a lot of things. It's true at least for children. So we could substitute animals for children and say that, yes, children depend on us, But that doesn't mean that doesn't mean we're allowed to treat children any way we want, right? We can't abuse children just because they're our dependents. So in general, we should probably say that there is a distinction here, a distinction between those dependent on what we're allowed to do to those dependent on us. The second thing we could say is that farm and lab animals do not depend for their existence or sustenance on humans. Now, in the status quo, this isn't true, because there's lots of pets, there's lots of farms, and there's lots of laboratories, and in such contexts, the animals are being fed by the people running those things, by the humans running those things. And so it's not easy to say that those animals don't depend on this. Now, nonetheless, it may in fact be true that we could release some of those animals and they might be able to survive in the wild without us. So they might not depend on us in the final sense of the word, like in the ultimate sense. They may presumably, at least in some cases, be able to survive by themselves. So if we claim either one of these, then we've rejected the dependency argument. So the next argument is the hypocrisy argument. So it goes, people who act in morally inconsistent ways are hypocrites and so have flawed characters. Ethical vegetarians and vegans act in morally inconsistent ways. Therefore, ethical vegetarians and vegans are hypocrites. So this isn't really an argument against the mistreatment of animals. This is really an argument that says that we shouldn't hold vegetarians and vegans as moral exemplars, right? We should think of them as hypocrites. Something notable about this argument is that it actually doesn't lead to any conclusions about how we should treat animals. Even if all vegetarians and vegans were hypocrites, we still might want to accept their arguments. Their arguments might be right, even though they're all hypocrites. So that's one thing to point out, is that this argument doesn't even really touch upon the treatment of animals as an issue. But what nonetheless, let's look at what are some counters to an argument like this. So the first thing we could say is that people who act in morally inconsistent ways are not hypocrites and so do not have flawed characters. So the problem here is that you could say this. You could define hypocrite and say that the definition of hypocrite is not moral inconsistency or something like that. But that just is what people mean by hypocrite. When we say someone's a hypocrite, we're saying usually that they're saying one thing and doing another, which essentially is being morally inconsistent. So it would be fairly weak, a fairly weak rejection to reject premise one, because premise one largely just seems to be definitional. So the second thing we could do is we could say ethical vegetarians and vegans do not act in morally inconsistent ways. So with this one, it just seems to be true that some vegetarians and vegans probably do act in morally inconsistent ways, right? How many vegetarians and vegans are in the world, and at least some of them we would think maybe sneak some meat on the side, or maybe do something else that we consider unethical, robbing banks or whatever. Insert your unethical behavior there. So it may not be the case that most vegetarians and vegans act in morally inconsistent ways. Some surely do. But it seems like the problem here really is that you can't say none of them do, but you probably can't say that all of them are morally consistent either. There are probably some vegetarians and vegans that are pretty morally consistent, relatively speaking. They may be moral saints in that regard. You'd probably have a mix of both, right? In reality, some vegans and vegetarians very consistent, some inconsistent. So either way, you're going to probably not have a strong rejection of premise 2. So the next argument is the emotional attachment argument. So it goes, if we feel greater emotional attachment to fellow human beings than to non-human beings, then we are morally allowed to harm animals in order to promote human interests. We do feel greater emotional attachment to fellow human beings than to non-human animals. Therefore, we are morally allowed to harm animals in order to promote human interests. All right, so once again, this is an argument that defends the permissibility of the way that we treat animals how we want to. So what are some counters? So the first thing we could say is that, we feel greater emotional attachment to fellow human beings than to non-human animals, right? We could say, I love my child more than I love my dog. But we are not morally allowed to harm animals in order to promote greater human interests. So in this, we're saying that the emotional attachment does not weigh into the moral permission to harm. So just because you like your kid a lot, that shouldn't matter morally, should it? Let's say you're in a situation where your moral attachment to your child, let's say, is very strong. It's stronger for your child than any other person, but let's say your child kills someone. So in that case, just because you have emotional attachment to your child, does that mean that it was okay for your child to kill someone? Does that in any way exonerate them? We might not want to say that, right? We might want to say that it's bad to harm people, it's bad to kill people, no matter what, whether we're emotionally attached or not. So in that kind of case, is an example of maybe why we might want to reject want to reject the role of emotional attachment in our total moral assessments of things. So the second thing we could do is we could say we do not feel greater emotional attachment to fellow human beings than to non-human animals. And in certain cases, this is wrong, like if you love your child the most. But in certain cases, this might be right. So I've met some people who I think probably love their dog more than anything, or their cat more than anything, right? People actually do get really attached emotionally to their animals. So it may not be okay to generalize about something like this. So if we reject either of those premises, then we get to the emotional attachment. We get to reject the emotional attachment argument. So the next argument is the rights argument. So it goes, humans have moral rights, animals lack moral rights. Those with moral rights are morally permitted to treat beings without moral rights in whatever way the rights holder thinks is best. Therefore, we humans are morally permitted to treat animals in any way we think best. All right, so once again, this is an argument for the permission to treat animals in whatever way we want. So what are some counters? So the first thing we could try to say, humans do not have moral rights. Now, if we were going to say this, we might just be saying there's no such thing as rights, or we might be saying there are rights, but humans don't have them. But most people probably wouldn't want to say this, right? We talked before about how most people probably would assign something like a right to humans. So what's the second thing we could do? A second thing we could do is we could say that animals do not lack moral rights. So here we're just saying that we reject this idea that animals lack rights. Animals have rights just like humans do. And really, if you're going to say animals lack moral rights, you're sort of begging the question a little bit. You're just assuming that animals don't have these rights. But why would we assume that as one of our premises? Doesn't that need some justification? And some people want to say that animals do have moral rights. So you would then have to have that argument between a person who thinks they lack rights and a person who thinks they don't. A third thing then we could say that those with moral rights are not morally permitted to treat beings without moral rights in whatever way the rights holder thinks is best. So, in this case, if we accept that humans have rights and animals don't, then we could say, well, even though we have rights and animals don't, we still have limits on those rights. We don't have a right to do that particular thing. We have a right to do lots of things, presumably, but that doesn't include treating animals however we want. Now, the difficulty here is that we probably have to justify why we don't have those rights. And once we start trying to justify why we don't have those rights, we're probably going to end up appealing to something like rights for animals or something like that. Maybe prudential concerns, or other humans who also have rights, but we're probably going to end up having those kinds of questions come up. But if you accept any of these counters, then you've rejected the rights argument. So the next argument is the argument from marginal cases. And it goes like this. If it is immoral to kill and eat marginal human beings and to painfully experiment on them, then it is immoral to treat non-human animals this way. It is almost always immoral to kill and eat marginal human beings and to painfully experiment on them. Therefore, it is almost always immoral to kill and eat animals and to painfully experiment on them. So this is an argument against treating animals any way we want. So what might be some counters to this? So one counter, the first counter might be that it is immoral to kill and eat marginal human beings. And by marginal here, we're talking about any human beings that might not have full moral status, right? This might include people who are in comas. It might include fetuses. It might include people who don't have full capacities, right, as a human. So we accept that it's not okay to just kill and eat those kinds of humans. or painfully experiment on them. But nonetheless, it's not immoral to treat non-human animals in this way. So here we would be trying to make a distinction between what we can do to marginal human beings and what we can do to animals. So we can't kill somebody who's mentally deficient, but we can kill an animal like a cow. Now, it may be that there are differences between marginal human beings and animals, but the difficulty is some of these differences may not be as big as we think they are. So, for example, we might say that we can do whatever we want with a cow because the cow has a low IQ, and that makes it okay to do that. But then if we make that argument, then and there's a person, a human being, who has that low IQ as well, then we find ourselves in a difficult position because we've seemingly justified killing human beings that have low IQ. So because of that, these marginal cases are tricky. So why is it okay to kill a cow with that low IQ, but it's not okay to kill a human with that low IQ? We have to make some kind of difference there. We have to specify what the difference is. And we might not be able to find a difference that we think is important enough to make that distinction. Okay, so what's another thing we could do? The second thing we could do is we could say it is not almost always immoral to kill and eat marginal human beings and to painfully experiment on them. So we might just say, some humans are different than others, and because they're different, we don't have to treat them exactly the same as we treat ourselves, let's say. So when we talked about abortion, we talked about the possibility that it was okay to eat, or not okay to eat, okay to kill the fetus in certain circumstances. If we're okay with killing fetuses, then we are actually okay with killing marginal human beings because fetuses are marginal human beings. Now, we might not want to categorize them as human beings. We might make the argument that they're not. But biologically, when we're talking about marginal human beings, we're talking about beings that have the same biology as a human, but have some kind of a deficit or something, right? So a fetus would count in that particular category. So maybe we do think that there are certain kinds of marginal human beings that we can do this to, and we can just say it's not immoral. So if we take either of those counters seriously, then we can reject the argument from marginal cases.